The steel doors of the ICU swung open with a violent crash. "Code Black," the intercom shrieked, a high-pitched wail that sliced through the sterile silence of Mercy General. Rain lashed against the high-rise windows, blurring the city lights into bloody smears. Serena Blake didn't flinch. She kept her hands steady, counting the drips of a saline bag. Around her, the hospital exploded into a panicked hive. Security guards sprinted toward the West Wing. Nurses scrambled for cover. In bed 4, Senator Elias Thorne lay dying. He wasn't dying from the gunshot wound that brought him in 3 hours ago. He was dying because his vitals were plummeting in a way that didn't make medical sense. Serena leaned over him, her face a mask of calm. The senator's eyes flew open. They were bloodshot and wild with terror. He grabbed Serena's wrist with a strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man in septic shock. His grip was like a vice, bruising her pale skin. "Don't trust your doctor," he hissed. The words were wet, choked with fluid. "They aren't saving me. They're erasing me." Serena felt the cold weight of a USB drive pressed into her palm. She didn't look down. She didn't react. She slid the drive into the hidden pocket of her tactical-grade nursing scrubs. "Who is coming, Senator?" she asked, her voice a low, melodic hum. It was the voice of a woman who had seen the worst parts of the world and survived. Before he could answer, the glass partition of the ICU shattered. A heavy-caliber round whistled through the air, punching a hole through the heart monitor. Sparks flew. The senator screamed as the monitor flatlined into a continuous, haunting drone. Serena didn't scream. She didn't drop to the floor like the others. She calculated the trajectory. The shot came from the rooftop of the parking garage across the street. The door to the ICU burst open again. It wasn't the gunman. It was Dr. Sterling, the lead cardiothoracic surgeon, followed by 2 men in dark suits who didn't look like hospital security. Sterling looked at the flatline, then at Serena. His eyes weren't filled with professional concern. They were filled with predatory hunger. "Step away from the patient, Blake," Sterling commanded, his voice trembling with a dark adrenaline. "He's gone. Give me his personal effects. Now." Serena looked at the senator's lifeless body, then back at the man holding the scalpel like a weapon. She felt the old familiar itch in her knuckles. The ghost of 1,000 missions stirred in her blood. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a ghost, and the ghosts were about to start screaming. "I can't do that, Doctor," Serena said softly. Outside, the power grid flickered and died. The hospital plunged into total darkness. In the shadows, Serena's eyes turned cold as ice.
6 hours earlier, Serena Blake was the hospital's favorite punching bag. She stood in the break room, the smell of burnt coffee and antiseptic thick in the air. Head nurse Miller threw a stack of charts onto the table, splashing coffee onto Serena's white shoes. "Clean that up, Blake," Miller snapped. "And don't just stand there like a statue. Bed 12 needs a sponge bath, and the morgue delivery is running late. Try to be useful for once." Serena didn't argue. She never did. She reached for a paper towel and wiped her shoe with a mechanical, efficient motion. Behind her, a group of young residents chuckled. "I heard she was in the military," one whispered, loud enough for her to hear. "Probably just a laundry clerk. She can barely handle a blood pressure cuff without looking like she's seen a ghost." They didn't see the way Serena's eyes tracked the exits. They didn't notice the calluses on her trigger finger. Dr. Sterling walked in, radiating an aura of Ivy League arrogance. He ignored Serena entirely, stepping over her foot as if she were a piece of furniture. "Nurse Miller, ensure Senator Thorne's room is restricted. Only my hand-picked team, no exceptions. We don't need some low-level floor nurse bumbling around a VIP." He glanced at Serena with pure disdain. "In fact, Blake, stay out of the West Wing entirely. You're a liability to my statistics." Serena watched them weave. She knew men like Sterling. They were the ones who sat in air-conditioned offices while better people died in the dirt. Her mind drifted to a dusty outpost in the Hindu Kush. She remembered the sound of a Black Hawk's blades and the weight of a dying comrade in her arms. She had performed field surgery with a pocket knife and a prayer while under heavy mortar fire. To these people, she was a janitor in scrubs. To the Department of Defense, she was a classified asset marked deceased. She made her way to the supply closet. She didn't need a sponge bath kit. She needed to check her hidden kit. Behind a loose ceiling tile, tucked away from the prying eyes of the security cameras she had already mapped, lay her insurance. An encrypted burner phone, a set of high-tensile zip ties, and a specialized sedative she had synthesized herself. The pager on her hip buzzed. It was a restricted alert. Code Black, ICU. The game was starting earlier than expected. She closed the ceiling tile and took a deep breath. The quiet nurse persona was a mask, and it was starting to slip. As she walked toward the ICU, she saw the senator being rolled in. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second his eyes met hers. He knew. He recognized the look of a predator hiding in plain sight. The darkness in the ICU was absolute, save for the flickering red emergency lights that bathed the hallway in an eerie, rhythmic glow. The backup generators should have kicked in within seconds. They didn't. Serena knew why. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was a tactical blackout. The hospital was being cut off from the world. No phones, no elevators, no help. "Blake, where are you?" Dr. Sterling's voice was frantic now, stripped of its previous arrogance. He fumbled for a flashlight, the beam dancing wildly across the room. The two men in suits had their guns drawn. They weren't Secret Service. Their stance was wrong, too aggressive, too polished. They were mercenaries. "The senator had a drive," one of the men growled. "Find it, now, or we start clearing this floor one body at a time." Serena was already moving. She didn't run, she glided. She used the rhythm of the emergency strobes to mask her movement. When the light flashed red, she moved. When it went dark, she froze. She was behind the heavy equipment cart before Sterling could even point his light in her direction. Her heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. This was her element. The chaos was her home. From the hallway, a scream rang out. A nurse had been spotted. A heavy thud followed, then silence. Serena's jaw tightened. She hated civilian casualties. She reached into her pocket and gripped a heavy glass vial of concentrated potassium chloride. It was a lethal injection if used intravenously, but in the hands of a Black Ops medic, it was a chemical weapon. "He's dead, Sterling," the mercenary yelled, checking the senator's pulse. "The drive isn't here. The nurse, she was right next to him." They turned their lights toward the corner where Serena had been standing seconds ago. Empty. Only a discarded pair of surgical gloves remained. Sterling's face went pale. "She's just a nurse. She's probably hiding in a closet crying. Search the floor." Serena wasn't hiding. She was climbing. She pulled herself into the ventilation duct above bed 4, her movements silent and feline. She watched through the slats as the mercenaries moved out into the hall, leaving Sterling alone with the body. Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. "The senator is secured," he whispered into the line. "But the asset, the nurse, she has the data. Send the extraction team to the roof. Kill anyone who isn't on the payroll." Serena felt a cold fury. Sterling wasn't just a doctor, he was a traitor. He was part of whatever conspiracy the senator was trying to expose. She reached down and unscrewed the vent cover with a dime. She didn't drop down. She waited. She needed more than just the doctor. She needed the whole hive. But first, she had to ensure the other nurses survived the night. The mercenaries were moving through the 5th-floor nursing station like a scythe through wheat. They didn't care about patients. They were looking for a woman in blue scrubs. Head nurse Milo was huddled under a desk, sobbing. A mercenary grabbed her by the hair, hauling her up. "Where is Blake?" he demanded, pressing the hot barrel of a suppressed pistol to her temple. "Tell me, and you live." I don't know," Miller shrieked. "She's useless. She probably ran for the stairs." The mercenary sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. A sudden metallic clink echoed from the dark hallway behind him. He spun around, shining his light. A silver kidney basin was spinning on the linoleum floor. It was a distraction. From the shadows above, a figure dropped. Serena landed on the mercenary's shoulders with the precision of a hawk. She didn't use a gun. She used a 10cc syringe filled with a fast-acting paralytic. She drove it into the soft tissue of his neck. He gasped, his body locking up instantly.
He hit the floor like a sack of stones, conscious, but unable to move a single muscle, not even to scream. Serena stood up, her silhouette framed by the red emergency light. Miller stared at her, her mouth agape. "Serena? What? What did you do?" Serena didn't answer. She stripped the mercenary of his radio and his sidearm, a Sig Sauer P320. She checked the chamber with a practiced, lethal flick of her wrist. The way she held the weapon wasn't like a novice. It was an extension of her arm. "Listen to me," Serena said, her voice dropping into a low, authoritative command tone that Miller had never heard. "Take the staff and the patients into the laundry chute room. Barricade the door. Do not come out until you hear me say the words, 'Silver Fox.' Do you understand?" Miller nodded dumbly, paralyzed by the sheer intensity of the woman she had spent months bullying. "Who are you?" Miller whispered. Serena checked the hallway, her eyes scanning for heat signatures in the dark. "I'm the person you told to go clean the morgue," Serena replied dryly. "Now move. They're coming." Serena watched them scramble away before turning back toward the ICU. Her radio crackled. "Team 1, report. We have movement on the north stairwell. Engagement is authorized. Erase the witness." Serena clicked the radio. She didn't speak. She just tapped out a sequence in Morse code. SOS. It was a bait. She knew they would trace the signal to the oxygen storage room. She headed exactly there. It was time to turn the hospital's life-saving equipment into a death trap for the men who brought war into her sanctuary. Serena stood in the center of the oxygen storage room. Tall, green cylinders of pressurized O2 lined the walls like silent sentinels. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a jagged, silver scar that ran from her wrist to her elbow. It wasn't a surgical scar. It was a fragment wound from a roadside IED in Kandahar. Beside it was a tattooed serial number, partially faded, 77B Orion. She heard the heavy boots outside. 2 men. They were moving with tactical spacing. They thought they were hunting a frightened girl. Serena leaned against a tank, waiting. The door kicked open. The beam of a tactical light swept the room, reflecting off the steel tanks. "We know you're in here, nurse," a voice mocked. "Give us the drive and we'll make it quick. You don't want to see what happens when we get bored." Serena stepped out from behind a tank. She didn't have her gun raised. She held a heavy industrial wrench. The mercenaries laughed. "A wrench? Really? What are you going to do, fix our plumbing?" One of them stepped forward, reaching for her. Serena moved. She wasn't human. She was a blur of calculated violence. She swung the wrench, not at the man, but at the valve of the oxygen tank next to him. The pressurized gas hissed out with a deafening roar. The force of the release knocked the man off balance. Serena followed up with a palm strike to his chin, snapping his head back. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, and heard the satisfying crack of bone. He went down. The second man raised his rifle, but the room was now filled with a thick cloud of escaping gas and frost. He couldn't see his target. Serena appeared behind him like a phantom. She wrapped a length of plastic tubing around his throat, using a surgical knot that tightened with every struggle. As he gasped for air, he caught a glimpse of her arm. The scar, the tattoo. His eyes widened. He recognized the mark. "Orion," he wheezed. You're supposed to be dead." "I'm a nurse now," Serena whispered in his ear, her voice cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. "And you're in my operating room." She tightened the cord until his world went black. She didn't kill him. She wasn't a murderer. She was a medic. She just needed them out of the way. She took their comms and their flashlights. The radio on the floor buzzed. It was Dr. Sterling. "Status report. We have a problem. Security footage from the backup system just came online. I've seen her move. This isn't Serena Blake. Check the federal database for an operative named The Raven, and someone get to the morgue. The senator's body, it's gone." Serena smirked. She had moved the body into the service elevator minutes ago. The real hunt was just beginning. The backup lights flickered back on as the hospital's internal security team finally rallied. But they weren't looking for the mercenaries. Serena looked up at the wall-mounted monitors. Her own face stared back at her. The headline scrolling across the emergency broadcast was chilling. Nurse Serena Blake wanted for assassination of Senator Thorne, armed and dangerous. Dr. Sterling had played his move. By hacking the hospital's internal system, he had edited the footage to make it look like Serena had pulled the trigger. The mercenaries were now being framed as security responding to a rogue employee. Serena felt the walls closing in. The FBI would be arriving in minutes. If she was caught now, the USB drive and the truth about the senator's murder would disappear forever. "Drop the weapon!" a voice boomed from the end of the hall. It was the hospital's head of security, a retired cop named Murphy. He had 3 guards with him, all with guns trained on her. Serena stood over the 2 unconscious mercenaries. To Murphy, it looked like she had just taken out his colleagues. "Murphy, listen to me," Serena said, keeping her hands visible. "Sterling is the one you want. He's working with a private military firm." "Shut it, Blake," Murphy shouted, his hands shaking. "I saw the video. You killed a senator in cold blood. Put your hands on your head." Serena looked at the cameras. She knew Sterling was watching from the security hub, smiling. He was going to let the hospital security do his dirty work. If they killed her, the case was closed. Suddenly, a flashbang detonated in the middle of the hallway. The world turned white. High-pitched ringing drowned out Murphy's shouts. Serena didn't wait for her vision to clear. She knew the layout of this floor by heart. She dove through the swinging doors of the pediatric wing, rolling behind a heavy medicine cabinet. But as she moved, a sharp pain flared in her side. She looked down. A stray bullet from the chaos had grazed her ribs. The blue fabric of her scrubs was soaking through with deep crimson blood. She was losing time and blood. She needed to reach the server room to upload the data from the USB, but Sterling had the entire hospital on lockdown. She ducked into an exam room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She needed to treat herself, but she had no supplies. Then she heard the clicking of high heels and the heavy tread of combat boots. "Search every room," Sterling's voice echoed through the door. "When you find her, don't wait for the police. End it." Serena grabbed a stapler from the desk and a bottle of high-proof rubbing alcohol. She had to be fast, she had to be silent, and she had to be deadly. Serena gritted her teeth, biting down on a piece of gauze as she pressed the heavy-duty stapler against her side. Thunk, thunk, thunk. 3 staples closed the wound. The pain was white-hot, but it centered her. She poured the alcohol over the site, the sting bringing her back to full alertness. She was no longer the hunted. She was the apex predator in a 500-bed concrete jungle. She didn't stay in the exam room. She climbed into the ceiling crawl space again, moving toward the security hub. If Sterling wanted to use the cameras, she would give him something to watch. She found the main junction box for the 4th floor and began pulling wires. She didn't cut them all. She rerouted them. In the security room, Sterling and his lead mercenary, a man named Vance, watched the monitors. Suddenly, the screens began to glitch. Serena's face appeared on every single monitor, but she wasn't running. She was sitting in the hospital's chapel, looking directly into the camera. She held up the USB drive. "Come and get it, doctor," she said, her voice echoing through the security speakers. "She's in the chapel! Go!" Sterling screamed. Vance and 4 men sprinted toward the west wing. Sterling stayed behind, gripping his scalpel, his eyes fixed on the screen. He watched as the men entered the chapel, guns raised. But the room was empty. The image on the screen was a pre-recorded loop she had set up 3 minutes ago. "Looking for me?" A voice came from right behind Sterling. He spun around, but Serena was already there. She hadn't gone to the chapel. She had come for the head of the snake. She grabbed Sterling's wrist, twisting it until the scalpel dropped. With her other hand, she slammed his head against the console. "You're finished, Sterling," she hissed. But Sterling laughed, blood trickling down his chin. You think this is about me? That drive contains the names of every official on the syndicate's payroll. You can't upload it. I've blocked all outgoing signals. And Vance? He's not in the chapel anymore. He's at the nursery. Serena's heart stopped. The nursery, where 20 newborns were sleeping. If you don't give me that drive in 5 minutes, Sterling wheezed, the oxygen levels in the nursery will be dropped to 0. You can save the data, or you can save the babies. What kind of nurse are you, Serena? Serena felt a cold, familiar rage. She didn't choose. She never chose. She did both. She plunged a sedative into Sterling's neck, knocking him cold, and bolted for the stairs.
Serena sprinted through the darkened halls toward the third-floor nursery. Her side burned with every step, the staples pulling at her flesh. She could see Vance through the glass doors at the neonatal unit. He was standing by the central control panel, his hand over the emergency shutoff valve for the oxygen line. He saw her and grinned, holding up a remote detonator. "One more step and I blow the backup tanks," Vance yelled. "The whole wing goes up. Give me the drive, Raven. This isn't your war anymore. You're a dead woman walking anyway." Serena stopped 10 feet from the glass. She looked at the rows of incubators. The tiny lives inside were oblivious to the monster standing over them. "You're right, Vance," Serena said, her voice eerily calm. "It's not my war, but this is my hospital." She didn't reach for her gun. She reached for a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. In one fluid motion, she pulled the pin and hurled it, not at Vance, but at the heavy MRI machine in the adjacent room, which she had secretly powered on to its maximum magnetic draw. The metal fire extinguisher flew through the air, caught by the massive magnetic pull. It smashed through the glass partition, heading straight for the MRI. As it passed Vance, the magnetic field grabbed the metal components of his tactical vest and his rifle. He was yanked off his feet, slammed against the MRI machine with a bone-shattering force. His gun was ripped from his hands, sticking to the side of the massive magnet. Vance struggled, pinned by the sheer force of magnetism against his metal gear. Serena stepped through the shattered glass. She ignored him and ran to the control panel. Her fingers flew across the keys, overriding the oxygen lockout Sterling had initiated. The levels stabilized. The babies were safe. She turned back to Vance. He was gasping, his ribs likely cracked from the impact. "The drive," he wheezed. "You'll never get it out of here. The FBI is outside. They have orders to shoot on sight." Serena looked out the window. Blue and red lights reflected off the rain. The building was surrounded. "I'm not going out the front door," Serena said. She grabbed a defibrillator from the wall. She set the paddles to maximum charge. She didn't shock him. She touched the paddles to the electronic lock of the emergency exit, sending a massive surge of electricity through the system. The entire floor's security locks blew out at once. The path was open. But she still had one more person to face. The FBI tactical team breached the lobby just as Serena reached the morgue. She wasn't running anymore. She was waiting. In her hand was the USB drive, and in the other, a tablet she had taken from the security hub. She had already initiated a blind transmission upload to a dead-drop server she used during her Black Ops days. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" a voice boomed. It wasn't the FBI. It was General Vanson's employer, the man behind the curtain. It was the Secretary of Defense, standing in the morgue with a small contingent of elite soldiers. He looked at the senator's body on the slab. "You've caused a lot of trouble, Sergeant Blake," the secretary said. Or should I say, Nurse Blake? "Mr. Secretary," Serena said, her voice steady, "I assume you're here for the drive, the one that proves you've been funneling medical research funds into private mercenary armies." The secretary smiled thinly. "It doesn't matter what's on that drive. You're a rogue nurse who killed a senator. The world will believe the story I write. Now give it to me, and I might let you live in a black site instead of a grave." "Check your phone," Serena said. The secretary frowned, pulling out his device. His face went from smug to ghostly tail.
The video of him entering the morgue, along with the audio of his confession, was being broadcast live to every major news outlet in the country. Serena hadn't just uploaded the data, she had turned the morgue's hidden security camera into a live feed. You bitch, the secretary hissed. He raised his suppressed pistol. Kill her, now! But his soldiers didn't move. They were looking past him. From the shadows of the morgue drawers, 3 men in tactical gear emerged. They weren't mercenaries. They were wearing the insignia of the Army Rangers. "Stand down, Mr. Secretary," the lead ranger said, his weapon aimed at the politician's chest. He looked at Serena and gave a small, respectful nod. "Long time no see, Raven. We got your Morse code. We've been tracking the cell for months. We just needed a witness who couldn't be bought." Serena felt the tension finally leave her body. The deceased operative had just brought down the most powerful man in the room. The FBI swarmed in a moment later, led by an agent who looked more confused than angry. As they tackled the secretary and secured the area, the head nurse, Miller, watched from the doorway, her eyes wide. She saw the soldiers saluting the woman she had called useless only hours ago. The sun began to rise over the city, casting a golden light through the broken windows of Mercy General. The hospital was a crime scene, swarmed by federal agents and news crews. Dr. Sterling was being led away in handcuffs, his career and his life over. He looked for Serena, but she was nowhere to be found. In the ICU, Nurse Miller sat by the senator's empty bed. On the nightstand, she found a small, handwritten note. It wasn't a confession or a goodbye. It simply said, "The floor needs mopping in room 402. Miller let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. She realized she never really knew the woman who had saved them all. At the edge of the hospital parking lot, a woman in a dark hoodie walked away from the chaos. Her side was bandaged, and her gait was steady. She reached the street corner where a black SUV was waiting. The window rolled down, revealing a man with silver hair and a scarred face. "The Pentagon is in an uproar, Serena," he said. "They want their best medic back. They're offering to reinstate your rank. Full honors." Serena looked back at the hospital. She thought of the babies in the nursery. She thought of the patients who needed someone to watch over them when the world went dark. She thought of the senator's last words. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was something more important. "Tell them I'm dead," she said softly. "It's easier that way." She handed him the USB drive, the original, containing the encryption keys they would need for the trial. "And tell them if they ever bring their war into a hospital again, I won't just be recording, I'll be operating." The SUV pulled away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk. She turned and began to walk, disappearing into the morning fog of the city. She had no ID, no money, and no home. But she had her name back, even if only she knew it. She was Serena Blake, the nurse who lived in the shadows. Back inside Mercy General, the new shift was starting. A young, arrogant resident was complaining about the lack of clean scrubs. He looked at the new nurse, a quiet woman with a steady gaze, and barked an order. She just smiled a small, knowing smile and went back to work. Because the world is a dangerous place, and sometimes the only thing standing between us and the dark is a quiet nurse with a secret. Never underestimate the quiet nurse.